My guests today are an Episcopal priest and an advertising executive. The priest is currently attending Harvard Graduate School of Business. The businessman recently published his second book about prayer. Please welcome to Christopher Close-Up, Reverend Robert Massey Jr. and John Trevokis. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you? We're glad to have you with us. First, I have to get to the answer to the question. What is an Episcopal priest doing at Harvard Business School?
Well, you know, of course, that the gospel is intended for all parts of our lives, and yet I think that my feeling was a number of years ago that the church was speaking primarily about the home and not so much about work. So I felt a special call and vocation to begin looking into some of the questions about how the gospel and our economic lives blend together, and I went there in a sense as an experiment, and I've been there now for 2 years.
John, you're a businessman and an advertising man, and you're writing books about prayer, so both of you have switched roles, it seems. How did that come about?
Well, it's quite similar. If God, it dawned on me some time back, could be relevant during the course of our family life in suburbia or wherever, why is it that God isn't relevant, or we don't think that God is relevant during the course of a business day? And of course God is. So that was the genesis of the books.
You two have a lot in common, but I understand this is the first time you met.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we're glad to have brought you together.
Thank you.
What are your classmates, what do they have to say about it? By that I mean the fellow priests in your diocese.
Well, I guess there are two groups of people. First of all, the people who I'm in class with at the business school tend to think I'm a bit peculiar for being a priest and attending. And of course, my fellow priests and clergy and other Christians think it's a little strange to be in business school. But I think that's too bad. In fact, we were talking a little bit before the show, and we were saying it's unfortunate that John and I are so strange. I mean, I think that more clergy should be looking into economic issues and business issues, since many of their congregation live in the business world every day. And I think it's sad that more business people don't write prayers and aren't more public about their faith. So we're hoping that we're the beginning of a trend.
Strictly speaking, then, you're not on an assignment from your bishop to prepare for chancery office or something like that?
Well, I had the approval of my bishop,
yeah.
But it was, in a sense, I was leaving the diocese and going off a little bit on my own. So it's kind of an experiment, both from a personal standpoint and a diocesan standpoint.
Well, John, the same question to you. How about your business associates? What are they?
Well, I didn't have approval from my bishop.
Yeah.
You did it on your own.
It's interesting, my associates, because that was really one of the reasons for the books, that I found that my business associates, who I only saw from 9 to 5, would be so intimate and outspoken about their lives, their family lives, their sex lives, everything, but mention God, and they cringed a little bit. I was saying, this man is a little weird. Now I think that more and more people are responding to me by saying, by making God relevant during the course of a business day, they're almost coming out of a spiritual closet. Yeah. Which is wonderful.
We hear a lot about prayer groups, more and more prayer groups in business and in government.
Well, that's what I wasn't talking about prayer groups, nor am I involved in prayer groups. It's almost a personal spirituality that you can have a relationship with God during the course of a business day and even be outspoken about it.
Bob, can personal and business ethics be separated?
Well, I would like to say no, but I'm afraid that in many situations they are separated. That is, that the organizational environment of certain companies will encourage people to see themselves as split between a certain life and set of values they have at home, and then a certain set of values they're called on to have, or in some cases pressured to have at business. And I think that split can be removed if people are more willing to talk about values in business and in their work environment. But right now, I think sometimes you do see an unfortunate split.
That's sad, isn't it? There's a saying down on the street that it's okay to be bullish, but not to be piggish. So the question between greed and profit-making, legitimate profit-making, comes up. How do you react to that? Is there a point where profit-making becomes greed?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that the profit motive will always be there in corporations and in a personal situation. It's this constant struggle for more that leads to greed almost without the person realizing person is being personally rapacious. That's the difficult thing for a person to realize. I have gone over that line.
A lot of bad business decisions are made as a result. So, in a point of view, it's beyond morality. It's good business to check that. Would you have any advice in answering that?
Well, I think the real question that we all have to face, clergy and lay people in business or outside, is who is God, or what is God in our lives? And I think for those people who can say, I believe in Jesus Christ, we have certain guidelines, and we are able to look at Scripture or talk to people in the Christian community who can help us when we enter into these dilemmas of how far to go. I think the problem is when you have someone for whom God is success or acquisition, or who's turned their whole center of their activity around becoming more important. There it's much, much harder because they are, in a sense, in bondage to this kind of worshiping of something like that. And so there I think it's very tricky. I run into all the time the question at the business school, when should I be understanding and pastoral, and when should I say, very much as you're talking about in your prayer, I can't agree with that, and that's something that I believe is against my faith and that Jesus himself would have objected to. It's a very tricky balance, but I think we're helped if we're in a Christian community.
Yeah, it helps to pray, too.
Absolutely.
John,
Absolutely.
to get the strength sometimes. John, in the business world, an employee is pretty much at the mercy of their boss in many respects. But maybe there are things going on that the company is doing. God knows, it could be from toxic waste to the abuse of employees. How far can an employee go to keep the peace?
Well, that's probably the most difficult, because that really impinges on one's humanity and career in a lot of respects. Yeah. Where does one take that stand? I think that a person can declare herself or himself without jeopardizing that career, let's say on a toxic waste issue, on a business practice that they think is a little suspect, paying off, that kind of thing. The person, however, I'm seeing more and more major corporation where the person stands up now and speaks his or her mind, is getting respect, not ridicule, which is, I think, wonderful. I think there's almost been an enlightenment in an awful lot of major corporations. An awful lot of the people in those oak panel boardrooms are very, very caring, sensitive people. If they can be appealed to on that sense, rather than challenged, I think we'll see real progress.
So you're thinking the means may be a little disturbing.
I think so. I think
But isn't it true this is really religion barging into the corporate boardroom? Isn't it really what you're saying?
Not religion, morality or spirituality, not religion. Religion, one assumes, is institutionalized.
I take back the word then. Yeah. But isn't it the very fulfillment of some of the things that you're saying, that we should bring the two together?
That's right. If spirituality is on a continuum, it's at a board meeting as well as it is on Sunday morning. And yes, those should be presented, aired, talked about, and reconciled. Yeah. But I think it's the means and the manner. I don't think we have to have constant skirmishes in the boardroom.
I think you're right. And I sometimes wonder if every decision is that simple. Sometimes they're very complex decisions,
Well,
and very good people can have honest disagreements about them, so that it isn't a black and white, right or wrong. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that I'm afraid I disagree with you both a little bit. I think that it is useful to have the church engaging in this kind of, sometimes it's confrontation, but raising issues that sometimes don't want to be heard. We have to be quite frank that I know many business leaders, they simply do not want to talk about these issues, and they don't want to think about. So I think there's room for both.
That's the other side of the coin.
I think in the gospel we see some challenging and some pastoral sensitivity. And I think there's room for people whose primary purpose is to challenge and people whose primary purpose is to be much more sensitive in listening. But really there are only three choices. The church can either ignore the situation and not do anything about it. They can go to the government and say, please do something about this because we don't like what's happening. Or they can go directly. And they sometimes, when they go directly, it's going to be in the form of, we hope, at least I hope, a constructive confrontation. So I think a little tension there is not bad, because as we know, there's always tension between the claims of the gospel and the promises of the gospel, and then the powers and principalities of our world.
I know I'm going to be accused of waffling, because I agree exactly with what you're saying. I think that there are some times when you can approach business with an attempt to have a discussion and get nowhere. So it eventually comes to the point where a confrontation is necessary.
But the decibel level, I think, is what I'm talking about.
I sense, though, that there's a gray area in here, because not everything comes off in an even way to be morally the same. There are some groups that might be aggressive, may have come to a more radical decision than that might be mainstream. Well, listen, I hate to say it, but our time is up, and I'm going to remind our audience that John Travoka's most recent book was published by Doubleday. It's entitled How to Keep God Alive from 9 to 5. John Travoka's Robert Massey, thank you so much for this Christopher Close-Up visit. It's been most enjoyable.